All right, we are, um, 1 second. Yes, we started recording this one, so thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Beers Beyond Border International Education Symposium webinar series hosted by Morgan State University, a public research university located in Baltimore, Maryland. And this year, entire symposium is online because of the COVID-19 global crisis. We scheduled 4 sessions for today and tomorrow, and you are attending the 3rd session of the webinar series. We have 1 more for tomorrow. And my name is Krishna Bista, Associate Professor of Higher Education at Morgan State University, and I'm your moderator for this afternoon. I see 670 guests listening, joining us from different time zones for this International Education Symposium. Thank you for listening to us. We are very fortunate to have you here. And this on the screen, you can see the direction. If you'd like to forward the telephone numbers or the joining instruction, please feel free to share this with your colleagues. And now this session focus on campus internationalization needs and challenges. And I was so lucky to have 2 of our experts for this session here, and let me introduce them. Darla Deardorff is a well-known international speaker, expert, and a scholar of international education, global leadership, and intercultural learning. Her works are cited in more than 7,000 papers. One of the most popular books that she has edited, produced is the SAGE Handbook in Intercultural Competencies. And you can see the full bio on the screen and her contact information. And also, I was fortunate to have this afternoon Dr. Chrystal Mwangi is another influential scholar of higher education, who frequently publishes on globalization, diversity, minority, and international student population. Recently, she has edited a special issue of the Journal of International Student on the role of student affairs in international student transition and success. Please join me welcoming our expert panelists and also the guests who are listening us this afternoon. I also acknowledge the teamwork that I was with International Education Task Force at Morgan State University, and we secured a grant for this international initiative that has been going on here at Morgan for a couple of years. So without further information, I'd like to welcome for the beginning opening remarks from Dr. Darla Deardorff.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Bista and Sharon and your team. It's an honor to be invited to share with you in this now online symposium for all of us. And I really enjoyed the other sessions today. So thank you so much for putting those together. And just a little bit more words of introduction and sharing a couple pieces of information with you. For those who may not know, I am Executive Director of the Association of International Education Administrators, AIEA, which is the leadership organization in the field of international education. It's really for university leaders who are trying to internationalize their institutions. And little did we know when we gathered just a month ago in Washington, D.C. for our 2020 annual conference of about 1,000 participants from over 50 countries, that very soon after that, a week and a half after that, we would be facing a whole new world in an entirely different situation than when we gathered together in DC just last month. So particularly with these unprecedented changes, it seems like it's more important than ever for us to really pull together and support each other. And to that end, AIA is really committed to trying to support the leaders in international education. And to that extent, we have resources on our website, and anyone is welcome to access those that we've tried to curate, particularly for leaders in international education. We're also hosting weekly town hall discussions for members, for AIA members, every Friday afternoon. So we'll have another one coming up this Friday. It's interesting that in the town hall discussions we've had so far, we've of course been getting lots of questions from members to each other about logistics. of how they're handling bringing students home, how they're dealing with supporting international students and so on. But in addition, we're also getting similar questions to what's been discussed here today around virtual exchange, as was talked about quite a bit in the last session here. A lot about communications, about financial implications, and some of that we'll be discussing further this Friday. We also have a special online forum for AA members on the member part of the website. So that's just a bit about what AIA is doing. Interestingly enough, we were in a meeting this morning with our counterparts in international education associations from around the world. So we were connecting with our counterparts in Europe and South Africa and Brazil, Argentina, Canada. Not surprisingly, they're facing very similar situations and challenges in all these parts of the world. The number one concern from members in all these different areas is around supporting students, it seems. There's also, we discussed a concern about the increase in xenophobia. And so that piece came up as well in the meeting this morning. Beyond AIA, I wanted to mention, as some of you may know, my own research and work, as Dr. Bista has mentioned, has been around intercultural competence development and assessment for over the last decade. And there's a really exciting project running now by the United Nations, UNESCO, that some of the participants may be interested in. It's the UNESCO was interested in finding a methodology that could be used with any group of people anywhere in the world, using little to no resources, and that could be facilitated by someone who may not have a formal background or training in intercultural communication. And so I've been working with them on the project for the last 2 years. I am pleased to announce that we completed phase 1 of that project in December when we launched an open access manual on developing intercultural competencies. And the name of the intercultural methodology is called Story Circles. It's adapted from indigenous traditions with the circle processes being used. And it's for the purpose of practicing intercultural competence. And UNESCO has piloted it in all 5 UNESCO regions around the world. And those are included in the manual. And now we're starting on phase 2, which involves regional trainings to help to increase the number of facilitators of the Story Circles methodology. There's an article that you can find in the IIE Networker that just came out last week about the Story Circles methodology. And we found that it's a wonderful tool for integrating domestic and international students. In fact, I've used it. I'm a research scholar also at Duke University, and we've used it a number of different ways at Duke, including new student orientation, bringing domestic and international students together. And we'll be now experimenting with how we can do this virtually, because up to this point it has been face-to-face. And so UNESCO is going to be working on this virtually to see how well it can work in that way too. So thank you very much, Karine, for posting the link to that manual. And it is available not only in English, but also in French, Spanish, Arabic, and Russian, and hopefully Mandarin. They're still working on that one. So that's just been really exciting development that I wanted to share with you. And if you use this methodology, I would love to hear from you. Please don't hesitate to contact me. Let me know what questions you have. Let me know how you're using it, how it goes for you. And the World Council on Intercultural and Global Competences also has some information about this Story Circles project on their website as well. And you'll see the website that Karine listed there. Never before have we needed intercultural competence like we do now. We must pull together to address this huge pandemic that we face and all the other global challenges. And I just will end with a quote that inspires me daily to continue to work toward intercultural competence, and it's what drives my work in the field of international education. And it's a quote by Martin Luther King Jr. when he said, "We must learn to live together as brothers, as family, or perish together as fools." So thank you for all the work that you're doing, all of you in this field.
Thank you, Dr. Deardorff. This is amazing. She shared lots of information from AIEA and then upcoming resources, including her recent book, The Story Circle, which is the open access book you can download at any time. And thank you, Dr. Karine Ulam, She has shared the links there on our chat room. And also look at some of the recent books and also the classical work on intercultural learnings and intercultural competencies. These are amazing resources. Thank you so much. Indeed, this is a great time, probably the biggest time of the history to learn more about intercultural competencies, global connection, global awareness. And thank you for your greater service for the academia and communities and to the scholars. With that, I'd like to request now Dr. Chrystal George Mwangi for her another 5 minutes remarks. Dr. George.
Hi, everyone. Sure. Thank you, Dr. Bista, and thanks to your team. And I'm really excited to be part of this panel today and appreciate being invited to do so. In terms of myself, one of the main questions driving my research agenda is how can my scholarship work to address equity, diversity, and criticality related to international higher education in order to inform and reform how internationalization efforts can be conceptualized. And to date, I've engaged in scholarship that's focused on international higher ed partnerships, the educational experiences of international and immigrant students, particularly those from Africa and the African diaspora, tensions between local needs and global pressures in higher education institutions, and comparative research on educational diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And I actually wanted to share just two potential opportunities with those who are listening today in regards to some of my work. I'm currently the principal investigator of a grant funded by an organization called the Worldwide Universities Network, in which I'm working with partners from England, Ghana, India, Ireland, and South Africa to develop a comparative, or at least attempt to develop a comparative approach for engaging student retention and degree completion strategies for diverse learners. And we've been working over the past year on this project. As universities expand access to higher education within their respective countries, there's a growing need for effective strategies that can really create equitable and inclusive educational environments, as well as just promote success of students from underrepresented backgrounds, whether that be race or case or social class or gender or nativity or ability or religion or language. And so team members on this particular project each work in a context where these issues certainly matter, and they matter around the world. Yet while we all tend to have our own national initiatives around improving equity in higher education, there are sometimes far fewer cross-country dialogues, strategies, and kind of common language for improving diverse student inclusion and persistence in higher education. And I think that really misses an opportunity to approach this problem as a global one. So we are, like I said, we've been working over the past year on this project and are really interested in connecting with others around the world who are also interested in kind of working together and learning from one another around the world around the types of initiatives and approaches we're using to really meet the diverse needs of learners in contemporary society. And so I'll be sharing some information with Dr. Bista. If there are folks on the call who are interested in potentially joining our network and team as we expand out, I'd love to hear from you. And then the second opportunity is just from that project. Our team will be hosting a virtual event coming up on Friday, April 24th from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. U.S. Eastern Standard Time. And again, I will provide Dr. Bista some information to share out via email. But it was supposed to be in person, but it's now going to be held virtually, as is everything these days. It's called the Higher Education Equity Summit, Navigating Local and Global Priorities to Achieve Success. And it's really going to be an event where we discuss discourses regarding diversity and inclusion within higher education and whether those align or conflict with pressures to priorities to internationalize, thinking about how U.S. Institutions as well as institutions from other country contexts strategize to engage both locally and globally to achieve greater equity and inclusion for students. And what are really innovative frameworks or examples or recommendations that can inform the creation of equitable educational conditions that recognize both local community needs and global pressures. So again, I'll be sending out some information that can be shared with you all if you're interested in joining that event that will also be hosted on Zoom in a few weeks. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. George Mwangi. for your outstanding service, research, and the opportunity that you shared with our colleagues. We'll be taking the Q&As a bit later. Please go ahead and use the Q&As. You can ask the question to our panelists using Q&As or chat room. And our panelists, when they get a moment, will be also replying you. And we have Sharon Grenades, who is also monitoring your questions, and we'll read some of them as time permit. As we structure the sessions now, after the brief remarks, we'll use 3 questions as a prompt to structure the rest of the conversation. And after that, we'll also take Q&As. So right now we have 80 plus, guests joining us, listening us. This is Campus Internationalization Needs and Challenge session, the 3rd session of our webinar series. So with that, I'd like to make a transition to our next session, panel discussion. So we start with the first question. What do you see as the current challenges for advancing internationalization of US higher education, and now with the COVID-19? So let's start with the first question. Yeah, you can chime in. Please unmute the microphone. Yes.
Sure. I can share a few things to start off, I guess. I think, in terms of challenges, even prior to COVID-19, although that's definitely thrown another huge issue at hand, I think, but even prior to that, I think as a global society, we're continuing to really face vast inequities that exist within education systems around the world, stemming from xenophobia or racism or nativism, and other social and economic forces that I think are very highly connected to internationalization, and sometimes impact internationalization, sometimes are reified by internationalization practices that I think, will continue to be things that we need to address as scholars and practitioners. I think contemporary society is experiencing lots of paradoxes. So, on one hand, we're becoming more global, and yet in some ways, in many country contexts, becoming more insular and more experiencing more nativism. And so within higher education, I think that, there's this expectation to be kind of globally connected via internationalization. And then at the same time, media discourses are debating whether internationalization is in demise due to socio-political climates around the world as well. And so I just think that it's, just a really interesting time for those who are engaging in internationalization practice to be able to kind of navigate that paradox of global engagement, but also this idea of tightening borders in many country contexts as well. And with COVID-19, I think that this is going to add an additional layer to that. So how do we navigate that into the future? I think, other paradoxes, again, around the fact that higher education is broadening participation around the world, and at the same time still experiencing high levels of inequity around who is successful and who's completing, and how are we thinking about international and immigrant students who are entering our campus spaces and how they're doing on our campus spaces as well. And I think that, internationalization also again straddles this line between being a force for public social good and also being a part of big business, and how we navigate those kind of drivers as well. So internationalization, there are all of these different agencies that help with international student recruitment and study abroad, and sometimes market internationalization as a commodity. But it's also, used as an educational experience, an experience for developing skills like intercultural competence and building different kinds of values. So I think that navigating these kinds of, big challenges, these big issues, these big paradoxes are things that our scholars and practitioners will kind of have to continue to think about. And, to me, again, really kind of making choices around how can hope for, in my perspective, how can equity drive our work? How can engaging in positive social change guide our work? I think that those are ways in which internationalization will be able to continue to thrive into the next 5 to 10 years, if we're really kind of thinking about what are the drivers, the motivations, the intentions behind being able to engage globally and come together in that way. So those are some of the things that I would say.
Darla, do you want to add comment?
Sure. I'd like to pick up on what at least where Dr. Mwangi left off in terms of the equity issue. I think, thank you so much for the words you just shared with us. And I think it's really telling that one of the largest foundations in the United States, the Ford Foundation, is focused solely on equity. That has become such a huge issue, and it's something that I think international education doesn't pay enough attention to. And I think HBCUs can really help us and lead the way in really looking at what that means and what that looks like within our institutions and increasing that access piece. And so thank you again so much for the work you're doing. And then wanted to just mention some other challenges and then spend a bit more time looking on kind of where things might be in 5 to 10 years, although of course it's very much unknown at this point, given all that's happening around the world. Certainly a current challenge, as I mentioned earlier, and as commented on by my colleagues from around the world at the meeting earlier this morning that I had, is in supporting students currently. That's one of the biggest current challenges. But beyond that, I think it's interesting. AIEA does a survey every 3 years to those who are leading international education efforts on their campuses at their institutions. And actually, we're coming up again this fall will be a time when we will implement that survey again. And in that survey, we ask the university leaders, what's your biggest challenge? And every single time that survey is given since 1999, the #1 challenge over and over and over is resources and the lack of resources. And we heard that earlier today in one of the sessions here as well. So resources remains the #1 challenge, particularly with the cut in public funding for those who are at public institutions. Certainly, one of the issues we talked about at this year's AIA annual conference and continue to talk about is how to make the case of international education to presidents and provosts. And I know we're getting to that a little bit later. There's a question that we'll be talking about related to that. In terms of equity, one of the burning issues for me, and I know for others has been too, how do we reach all students with international education, not just those who are privileged enough to go abroad? And so really looking at what does that mean? What does that look like to really reach all students with international education? And that's something I'm particularly passionate about. Taught a 3-day course on for leaders in international education. There's a lot that could be said about that piece of it. I already mentioned the need to combat rising xenophobia. It's been rising and even more now with the pandemic. And I think there's a lot that international education could do to help with that. Then as we've heard from some of the sessions earlier today and others, is a continued focus on sustainability and addressing the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, remain some of the key challenges, and there are ways that international education can certainly do that. In terms of the future, I'd like to say just some words about the future. First of all, I'm hearing repeatedly these days an adage of never waste a crisis. And I think this really becomes a real opportunity for all of us in international education. There was a recent article this week by a higher education leader, Andrew Allen, and he talked about how this pandemic might be the best gift higher education could have ever asked for. Now, he went on to say a lot more about that, but kind of looking at what does this mean for the future? Well, immediate future, it's interesting to see the rise of kindness movements. I just read on BBC this week about an emerging movement in Canada called caremongering, and really that increase of kindness. When we look to the fall, there was a recent survey done with university presidents, and only 1/3 of those presidents expected their universities to be back to normal with face-to-face classes. And so that's a reality that we need to look at even for this fall. Other realities that were recently cited in different articles that have been published just in the last week or two will be the shrinking global middle class now as a result of the pandemic. The rise of health security is something that we should be paying attention to in international education. And the need to look beyond global mobility. that international education is no longer about just moving students around the world. And there are those of us who've been saying that for years, particularly those looking at internationalization at home and what does comprehensive internationalization look like, but still the main focus has been predominantly on study abroad, on bringing international students in. And one expert, Simon Marginson, said it could take up to 5 years to regain the momentum in terms of global student mobility. So we're looking at this really in the long haul, but in the meantime, what opportunities might there be for the rest of us? And another article talked about looking, kind of using a reverse technique to say, well, if international education, not to say it's not about study abroad, but if it's not about study abroad, what would it be about? And kind of using that to spur creativity, spur innovation. And so part of that includes rethinking what teaching and learning looks like. And we've heard today quite a bit about virtual exchange. But beyond virtual exchange, what could a centrality of focusing on teaching and learning look like? And what does that look like in international education? With what I'd like to see, and some of the research shows, really much more of a focus on intercultural and global competence development. David Di Maria mentioned cultural humility, which is another really key aspect as well. And so there's a whole piece around that we could talk about. Also to that end, I've been involved in working with the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, on their Education 2030 project. And they're also in phase 2 now. And when they look to Education 2030, education all levels, one of the things that really emerges is the focus on student agency. And it's striking to me that that even in these panels, and a lot of our conferences, we don't listen to the voice of students. I'm delighted that students are involved today, and I would actually love to hear your voices, but we really need to do a much better job of listening to student voices because of this rise in student agency, of looking at what can we co-create with students, that this is no longer something we do to them, but we're involved in international education with them. And so we need to refrain from continuing to talk about students, but really engage with them in our work a lot more than what we've done up to this point. Obviously, there's going to be a need to clarify higher education's value. What's the value added? And I think we're already seeing with the pandemic the value of research and expertise. Everyone's waiting for that vaccine, and the world can't move on until we get that vaccine, and that requires that research. And so I think that really emphasizes the role and importance of higher education institutions in moving forward. We need to rethink what does that mean. Within international education, there's been a long-standing need to increase diversification. There's been far too long reliance on China. And what we're seeing now as a result of this is perhaps an increase in regional interactions. That's been increasing, but this might kind of push that even further about interactions within Asia, within Latin America. It's not just always a global north-south kind of piece. There's definitely going to be a need to form deeper and more innovative partnerships beyond bilateral partnerships and beyond partnerships with other higher education institutions. So what might deeper and innovative partnerships with industry look like, for example, and how can we rethink ways in which we approach partnerships? And then certainly travel is changing, already changed. And as I mentioned already, the health security with the rise of online conferences like this one and other online learning opportunities, which could certainly open up greater access, which comes full circle back to looking at equity and access as well.
Thank you, Dr. Deardorff. That's really eye-opening to look into the past, future, and how the global crisis became a reset button for higher education. Yes, it's eye-opening for many of, for me, even as a faculty members and my colleagues, how we have been doing now, from moving from face-to-face class to online and rethinking ourselves and looking into our skill sets to do things differently. So yes, I think we're really going out of our thinking box paradigms, and as you mentioned, now this is also time to include the student perspective, and I'm glad we have roughly 15 graduate students who are listening us this afternoon, and thank you. So with that, we move to the next question that we have for the session. How do international faculty and international students help in the process of internationalization at home?
So I can, since I mentioned the internationalization at home piece, just to start a little bit with that, certainly research shows that the faculty in general play a really key role in internationalization and the efforts we do. And I think one piece that might be helpful to consider, because there are quite a number of myths around international students and faculty, that, for example, international faculty may be more interculturally competent. They might, but just by the virtue of being international doesn't make one more interculturally competent. There's a myth that just bringing international students to campus means magic will happen and internationalization will happen, when far too often they stay segregated, isolated. They're not integrated intentionally into our institutions and even into the classes. So there are quite a number of different myths that are out there about this. And one piece to consider, some of you may know, is Allport's contact hypothesis, that it's not enough to just bring people together, that we need to be much more intentional, and we need to be working toward common goals for meaningful learning to occur. And so I wanted to put that piece out there. And then I wanted to bring back and highlight a point that one of your earlier panelists made from this morning, when Dr. Giabate was talking about, we need to not just see international students as international students, but we really need to understand the diversity within all of our students. And even those that might not seem very diverse, when we really start getting to know them and understanding them, there's a lot of diversity there. But particularly with our international students, I think we're very quick to just lump them into one category, or if we don't do that, we at least say, oh, well, Chinese students this or that, or Indian students this or that. And for those of you who might be familiar with Chimamanda Adichie's Danger of the Single Story TED Talk, if you haven't seen that, I highly recommend it. She really drives the point home, that there's a real danger in just looking at people as one thing and only one thing. And so I think in our work with all of our students, we need to go beyond these broad categorizations of looking at our students, and particularly international students, and then looking at what can we learn from our international faculty, and how can we be much more intentional beyond just simply having them on our campuses and in teaching in the classroom.
Dr. George Mwangi, would you like to add?
Sure. I mean, I completely agree with everything that Dr. Deardorff shared. You know, like she was saying, a structural diversity, just the presence of people, isn't going to really make change on a campus, and in fact could actually make engagement worse if there aren't intentional learning opportunities structured. When you get lots of diversity, you know, there's also opportunities for tensions and all of these things that can happen that have to be worked through in the university space and with intentionality. So, you know, again, just the presence of people alone isn't going to necessarily create a shift. But I will also say that I think that international faculty and students are incredibly essential when we think about internationalization at home. And I think that oftentimes these faculty and students are doing lots of both formal but also informal work to drive the success of internationalization at home practices. What I actually think is the more essential question is, you know, how do colleges and universities do better to acknowledge and value that work and that labor that they engage in? You know, how do universities and colleges formalize their engagement, their work, their labor, you know, for driving internationalization at home to successful outcomes? How do universities provide opportunities for our international communities to also benefit from internationalization at home, and not just kind of talk about how domestic students will benefit from it? Because as Dr. Deardorff said, you know, just because you are an international faculty member, for example, doesn't mean that intercultural competence is a skill that you're an expert around. So how can everyone as a community benefit from this? I think that those are really important things to kind of continue to think about, because again, I think our international faculty and international students are engaging in lots of ways to educate our communities on our college campuses, again, whether formally or informally, but are oftentimes actually not really acknowledged for that for those efforts in ways that demonstrate the time, resources, sometimes emotional labor that kind of goes into that. So how can universities do better to support that?
Thank you.
And I would also like to just add, this is an issue that AIA's members are looking at as well. And we were supposed to have had a forum this spring at Northern Arizona University looking at this issue around faculty and students, which unfortunately have been postponed until next April of 21. So you all have the opportunity to come then, hopefully. But this is certainly an issue that has been really become important to AIA members and internationalization of their campuses. I would also, one other piece I would add is the importance of, again, listening to international students. A couple years ago, I was able to do focus groups of international students at different universities around the United States, and it was really interesting to see what came from that in terms of how much they really value relationships with faculty, how important that is. And they gave a number of other suggestions that are really helpful for us to take it into account as we're being much more intentional at our institutions in terms of having international students among us.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with the panelists. Myself, as a Nepalese American professor here, I have gone through this path from this international student to international faculty member. And what I see here is a big trend. And, you know, since we are very proud as a country of diversity and multicultural country, you know, international student is a growing field, is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And with the global crisis, it has given a new shape how we move forward. But what I really want to, you know, remind that the research around international student and faculty is increasing day by day. Every year, there are more than 150 doctoral dissertations written on international student in study abroad, which is quite a large number yearly production. And also we have a few professional journals in the field. And the role of international faculty member has been well documented, particularly for the faculty productivity and the research that they have done. And if we look into our manpower in the entire country, across the country, at least 70% of the scientists, engineer, you know, those in high skill field are the former international student or the faculty members. And then the same thing goes to the number of faculty member, international faculty member, 120,000 alone from China, about 80,000 from India. And the number has been increasing, the number of international faculty members who have been teaching, and they are the former international student. Now, they are not only the student or the faculty, you see the paradigm shift in leadership role. Many of them are department chair, provost, dean, or even university president and chancellor in the top universities across the country, including a small community college. And again, when we talk about internationalizing at home, then also we should not forget the two-way traffic that, you know, our language, heritage, cultures, also transformation of those, you know, our identities, and also bringing the knowledge, indigenous knowledge, as well as the big things happening, mega trends occur across the globe. So it's a connection to both ways. And as both of you have mentioned, that we are still looking the traditional paradigms of international student, their recruitment or study abroad. Probably with this crisis, we'll look into the modern way, innovative way of recruiting international student or expanding our program for a home student as well as foreign student. So with that, I'd like to move to the next questions that we have here. How can the senior administrative leadership, such as president or provost, advance internationalization at their campuses? Please unmute microphone and you can chime in. Sharon, if you'd like to add anything else, you know, any comments, that's also fine. You can unmute microphone.
I mean, okay. I can start off a bit. I think, so, you know, one challenge that sometimes I see in the research that I do is that internationalization has in some ways become isomorphic. So, you know, everyone's kind of wanting to pursue it in very similar ways. And there's like this notion that, you know, internationalization isn't, even in scholarship, isn't always defined very clearly. And so I think that senior administrative leadership really need to kind of pursue internationalization in a way that's mission centric and mission centered. So what, you know, what is the mission of their institution, and how can internationalization help to support that mission versus, you know, how can I just pursue internationalization? How can our university pursue internationalization? Because it is, you know, the buzzword, or the, you know, the thing that everyone's supposed to do now, right? But again, if we can kind of come back to a mission-centeredness approach and an equity-oriented approach, I think that those will really kind of benefit so many in our communities. And, you know, particularly for institutions who have very specific missions, like historically Black colleges and universities. HBCUs have always been global. They've always engaged in global ways, particularly with other countries in Africa and the African diaspora. And there's a very clear, you know, a clear link there. So, you know, I think that as HBCUs or as community colleges or as other types of institutions really think about, like, who are we? And in what ways can internationalization help to support who we are and who we hope to be? I think that that's really the key kind of linchpin in thinking about it, versus just internationalization for the sake of engaging in it. So that's something that I would share.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you. This is actually, I would say, one of the most burning questions for members of AIEA, since many of them report to provosts or presidents. And so oftentimes the conversation does turn to this particular question. So I wanted to emphasize again what Dr. Mwangi said in terms of the mission and mission-centric. And if institutions really care about students, and if students are at the center of that mission, then internationalization matters if they're going to make a difference in this world and be successful. So of course, ideally, we would love for both provosts and presidents to be champions of internationalization, although we recognize that doesn't always happen, particularly because of so many competing priorities, and that becomes a real challenge. For provost, it would be really helpful to incentivize faculty around international education endeavors, and particularly if this could be built into the tenure and promotion process. And if any of your institutions have internationalization already built into your tenure and promotion, I would love to hear from you. And we can learn from you on how you did this. But that is becoming crucial, again, because of the key role that faculty play in internationalization efforts throughout the institution. In terms of what presidents can do to advance internationalization, there are many ways. I will mention just 3 beyond what I've already said. One is to understand that internationalization is integral to student success versus viewing it as a source of revenue. It's a really different kind of paradigm shift for how presidents need to view internationalization. Second, that they really need to see this as focusing on developing a whole institution approach to internationalization, and not viewing it as being the responsibility solely of the senior international officer in the international office. But it's really going to take a whole institution approach to internationalization, to really embedding it throughout. Earlier, David DiMaria talked about we have to go beyond a vaccine approach of just take this one course and you're good for international. No, it needs to be embedded and interwoven throughout our whole institution and the culture of the institution. So that takes a lot of leadership and vision from the president as well as for others. And then finally, it was mentioned earlier, and I just want to bring it back into the discussion from a previous panelist, that presidents can really play a key role in opening doors to stakeholders and to potential partners. And so I just wanted to mention that as something that came up in an earlier session as well.
Thank you so much. And when we talk the senior administrators or the senior leadership at the university, I think it's also about the faculty and students. I think we need to be also active on our side the more we are curious and we share our need and interest, probably also that will help them to rethink. Sometimes, all of us do have a blind spot. Sometimes, yes, they do have a certainly different priorities, and international education or internationalization, maybe less priority for some of the colleges and campuses. But as an active faculty, as a faculty with a high level of interest, and as a students, probably it's also our responsibility to share our interest and ask the programs. Sometimes as a faculty, since we have too many hats on, classes, dissertations, or other services, probably we may not be aware of the existing resources on campus, including study abroad, collaborative project, or anything. I think it's a matter of contact, matter of asking the faculty member or the office staff of the Office of International Programs. Sometimes that's also some of the things not explored by faculty or graduate or undergraduate students. And thank you, Dr. Deardorff and Dr. George Mwangi, for answering the questions. We move. This is the last question of our panels, and now we move to Q&As for panel discussion. Yes, we have 85 colleagues, scholars are listening us this afternoon. Please send your questions, and we have two ways to answer the questions. One, our panelists can directly use the chat room to answer your questions, and then the second way, my colleague Sharon is closely monitoring those questions, and maybe he will start with the first question that he has noticed. Sharon?
Great. If you can make your attention to the Zoom webinar chat. Question 1. Most of the universities were not prepared for the COVID-19, as Dr. Darla said is the best thing that could have happened. Because we can have more alliances and be closer between institutions of higher education, do you think there are more alliances between institutions and countries in developing joint strategies? There will also be separation of existing alliances between institutions. That goes to directly to Darla, and then Dr. Chrystal, feel free to also answer.
Sure, so thank you very much for that question. And I think this comes back to perhaps one of the paradoxes that Dr. Mwangi mentioned earlier, is that institutions strongly desire to collaborate and partner with each other, but they're also competing with each other. And I think that that's really quite a challenge in terms of developing more alliances between institutions and working toward joint strategies, particularly around the SDGs. Because, for example, now there's even a ranking of institutions in how they address SDGs. So maybe this comes back to rethinking some of the rankings that are done, and maybe instead of ranking by individual institution, maybe there's some other way to look at that, because otherwise, as long as that some of those pieces are out there, that competition piece will remain. And then that becomes a bit of a conundrum when it comes then to building those closer alliances.
Thank you. Dr. Chrystal, any comments on?
Sure, and I think right now everyone is in such a tizzy, but I do, I don't know if, it's hard to even, be so sure about how people are going to continue to react to this and how COVID-19 is going to kind of continue to impact us. There's still so many unknowns, but I do think institutions, this moment will be such an important one for institutions to make choices, and for nations to make choices around whether to work together and to engage or to retreat and be more insular, to maintain strategic alliances, to maintain partnerships and collaborations, or, to nullify those. And so, I think that we will continue to have to wait and see how that plays out. But again, I don't think that we live in a world in which we can really be insular. Even again, the development of a vaccine, the ways in which we engage in work needs to be global. We need to be able to learn from one another. And so it's my hope that institutions will lean in and will continue to kind of support global work, but we'll have to do that work in different ways. You know, and for some of us who engage in global work, we're already doing it. I mean, like I said, with the research team that I work on, we are all across the world. So we've only ever met in person one time at a conference. All of our meetings are, you know, via Zoom or other platforms, or, you know, we use technology. The challenge is that in some places and around the world, those infrastructures aren't quite there yet as well. And so I do wonder how COVID-19 is going to impact continue to kind of maybe marginalize some areas of the world and kind of center others around because of access to technology and infrastructure and things of that nature. I think that we're, you know, there's also going to have to be intentionality around that as we move forward and thinking about how to make sure that we're not reifying, you know, unequal power dynamics in certain ways.
The one side housekeeping, I'm promoting all of my guests to panelists for a group pictures for the virtual screenshot we are almost toward the end of our sessions. We'll take maybe another 5 questions. So in the background, I am promoting all of our guests to panelists for the group pictures, but there is no you know, no requirement as such if you do not like to take pictures later on. So Sharon, continue asking, you know, reading the couple of questions for our guest.
Great. If you could again look into the Zoom webinar chat. Question 2, what limitations do you see in the current research on intercultural competence? And that
so I can take this one because this is what I've lived and breathed for over the last decade. There are a lot of limitations to the current research on intercultural competence. I'm thinking that a colleague in Australia and I put together a book called Intercultural Competence in Higher Education that came out fairly recently through Routledge. And in the last chapter, we listed a whole host of questions that we feel still need to be researched. But one of the main limitations of what I see is that there are researchers in each discipline doing research on intercultural competence, and they're not connecting with researchers in other disciplines. And so there's a lot of reinventing of the wheel. So for example, there's really wonderful work being done in healthcare, because there it really becomes more of a life or death matter. It's not just something nice to have. But in international education, how much are we really learning from those in healthcare? And to that end, I actually had 2 of the main pioneers in this work in healthcare, Trevor and Maria Garcia, actually write a chapter in the intercultural competence book that Lily Ayres Ratnam Smith and I did on cultural humility, because cultural humility is really a big thing in healthcare, and we have a lot to learn around cultural humility and also cultural empathy. There's also a lot being done in different languages, but if we don't read Mandarin or Portuguese or Italian, it's really difficult to access that. And so that is the reason actually why the World Council on Intercultural and Global Comms exists, is to bring together researchers and practitioners from different sectors, from different disciplines, different languages and countries, so we can really learn from each other to move forward on the research in intercultural competence, because frankly, there's not a lot of forward movement, because there's so much of kind of spinning in place and reinventing the wheel, because we're all only talking to each other in our own fields and disciplines. And then of course, there's a lot to be said about within our field of international education. There's been a lot of research and studies done around study abroad and intercultural competence, but what about international students? And certainly Dr. Bista can speak more to that too, but looking at what about all the other aspects and facets of intercultural competence within an institution. And I think there was even a question around that, is, you know, we really need to look much more around how do we develop intercultural competence for all students, and not just our students, but also our staff and faculty. So I could talk about this for hours, but I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you. Maybe we can take 1 or 2 questions. And now we have 73, you know, colleagues here, and then, you know, I also, maybe Suran, we can take one more question and then move to the next section that we have.
Okay. It's 4 o'clock. Question number 3, what is going to be the role of the International Affairs Office in this situation?
In regards to COVID-19, you mean, in particular, or?
Yes.
I would assume. Okay. So, you know, I mean, I know on campuses around the country, international affairs offices, international, you know, student scholar offices or national programs offices, you know, whatever they're called, are incredibly busy at the moment around, you know, around so many of these issues. But I think, so I do think international affairs offices are going to continue to play a central role, particularly around the needs of our international students and entry into and out of countries. The same with study abroad, thinking through things like virtual study abroad options and, you know, other kinds of ways in which we can engage globally and strategizing in that way. But I do hope that this current situation also provides an opportunity for greater intentionality in kind of reducing silos and reducing, you know, in having just international affairs offices be involved in particular areas or aspects of campus, or a multicultural affairs office, or, you know, things like that. I think that this particular issue, COVID-19, has really helped to, I hate to use the word helped, but has really kind of additionally catalyzed universities seeing the kind of overlapping issues that impact our work, the need again to engage technology integration, the need to kind of think about, you know, housing and food security for both our domestic and international students, that all of these kinds of needs that require collaboration across offices on campus and require amplifying of offices that engage in student support. So, you know, I definitely think that we're going to continue to see that moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, I'd like to acknowledge our supporter for all the webinar series and many colleagues who represent many of these organizations, including Morgan State University, Open Journals in Education, Journal of International Student, American International Recruitment Council, Network for Research into Chinese Education Mobilities, Star Scholars Network, World Council on Intercultural and Global Competencies, and for technical support, University of Louisiana Monroe. And I have invited my visionary leader at Morgan State University. Actually, we have two visionary leaders, Dr. David Wilson, president of Morgan State University, and Dr. Jakob Asteke, assistant vice president of the International Affairs. And here we have the presence of Dr. Asteke, who was listening all the session. Dr. Asteke, would you like to say, put your few words as a concluding?
Yes. Can you hear me well?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. So I want to say thank you for the organizers of this workshop and symposium. It's amazing. Darla, I've been attending those AIEA town halls every Friday. So thank you for all what you guys are doing. We all have to work together and because this time is very challenging to all of us. I've learned a lot from what other universities are doing. We're trying our best, and we are here to support each other. So I want to thank Force at Morgan for bringing such an amazing event on our campus. In our division, we support campus internationalization, and I'm so proud to see that my team members are doing amazing work. So all I want to say is I keep saying, keep up doing the great work. And the rest of you who are joining us online as panelists or as listeners, let's come together and we can go through this tough time together. And I'm sure we're going to learn so many new things we have never envisioned of doing. And hopefully that this will be, you know, problems is how you grow, and challenges is what's going to make us better. And we're hoping that maybe a year from today, when we have another workshop and conference call, we will step back and say, what did we learn from what we discussed a year ago, and how did we become better at providing services to our students. So thank you for all the panelists. And we're all busy, but I really appreciate your passion for this work you're doing, and the time you found to join us and share all your knowledge and expertise. So I really appreciate what you've done for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. STK. And we have here contact information if you want to get a copy of slides or any information or for future collaboration. So with that, now we'd like to go for the group pictures and the discussion. It was really nice to see many of you. Right now on the screen still I see 72 scholars we have here. And also I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge some of my colleagues whom I enjoyed working over the years, actually all of you. Here on the, we are going to take a pictures, I believe, some kind of a screenshot. I know we have more than plenty here. On the screen I see Suzanne Commerce, former student of Dr. Chrystal Mwangi, and one of my colleagues. Recently we produced the first book. Susan, would you like to say something about your latest book? And also we have Moderator Moment, she is working on the second book project, and many other colleagues who have carrying on excellent book project. Susan, I'd like to give you 30 seconds.
A 30-second pitch. Thank you, Krishna.
Mm-hmm.
We are editing a book, and the title is Inequality in Study Abroad and Student Mobility, Challenges and Future Directions. And we address some of the things we talked about today as well, like alternatives to study abroad, ways in which study abroad is advantaging certain students but disadvantaging other students at the same time. And we have a really nice collection of authors who wrote chapters exploring certain themes. So yeah, we're looking forward to that. And Chrystal is writing the foreword. So it's going to be a nice book, and it's coming out in the coming months. So we will keep you posted on that.
Thank you, Dr. Commerce. Appreciate it. In the last minute, I think Sharon is taking lots of pictures there. That's amazing. You can unmute your microphone if you like to say anything, any comments, any suggestions. We'd like to take that now. Maybe Dr. Mohammed, would I like to take 30 seconds to pitch your upcoming book? Unmute your microphone. Yes.
Yes. My colleague and I, Janet Boyd, is co-editing a book on international support services and engagement, student engagement. So we're looking forward to getting more abstracts that we are sending. We're waiting to get more abstracts. If you're interested, you can email Krishna and she can give you my contact information.
Yes, thank you so much. And in the chat room, probably you saw the link. There are several books. Actually, this year we're planning to put together for at least 10 books for the global student mobility. So we welcome book chapters or the new ideas for the book proposal. And thank you so much. Thank you for joining from all over the world. I know it's a difficult time, but thank you for taking time for this afternoon to listen to us and to share your ideas and expertise. Stay safe, healthy, and stay connected. We'll be certainly doing some collaborative project in the future. Thank you so much again.
And Dr. Bista, can you just add quickly the next session for tomorrow? Can you just post that in the chat or as a slide for any of those who have requested that?